Hey guys, so this is the time signature practice quiz, and if you got 5 or more wrong, you need to redo it. And in order to redo it, you're going to have to understand a little more about time signatures. So, if you haven't looked at the time signature video yet, you need to go back and watch that because it's going to make a lot more sense. This quiz will make a lot more sense once you look at that video. So I'm opening up the time signature practice quiz. Your name, last name, first name, choir. First question is, in 6/8 time, what does the top number mean? Be specific. So don't just say the top number is how many beats per measure. You need to actually tell me what the 6 means. So in this case, your equation, top number equals, there are blank beats or pulses per measure. You're literally going to copy that in and fill in the blank. So the top number means there are 6 beats per measure. Question 2, in 3/4 time, what does the bottom number mean? Again, be specific. Going back to our equation, and I explained this in the time signature video, so if you didn't watch that video, once again, you're going to want to go back and watch it. But the equation for the bottom number is this sentence: the blank note receives 1 beat, or you could use the word pulse. The blank note receives 1 beat. So in 3/4 time, since 4 is on the bottom, that means the quarter note receives 1 beat. And that's all you have to, that's really all you have to put. If the 8 was on the bottom, the 8th note would receive 1 beat. If the 2 was on the bottom, the half note would receive 1 beat. If there was a 16 on the bottom, the 16th note would receive 1 beat, and so on and so forth. In 6/8 time, how many beats does a quarter note get? So, going back to our formula, in 6/8 time, there are 6 beats per measure. The 8th note receives a beat. So for 6/8, I know there are 6 beats per measure, and the 8th note receives 1 beat. My question is asking, in 6/8 time, how many beats does a quarter note get? So, if I go back to my family tree of notes, and I know that if an 8th note in 6/8 time, like we just said, an 8th note receives 1 beat in 6/8 time, that means how many beats will a quarter note get? Well, I can fit 2 8th notes equally into 1 quarter note. Therefore, if my 8th note is worth 1 beat, my quarter note is worth 2 beats. Because in 6/8 time, there are 6 beats per measure, top number. The 8th note receives 1 beat. So my 8th note receives 1 beat, which means my quarter note is going to receive 2 beats. So the answer here is 2. Next question is, in 4/4 time, how many beats does a quarter note get? In 4/4 time, going back to our formula, in 4/4 time, the top number, there are 4 beats per measure. Here's my 4/4 time signature right here. There are 4 beats per measure, and now this time the quarter note. Remember, you need to spell it out. You don't want to write 1/4 because that's a fraction, not a name. So the bottom number is the quarter note receives 1 beat or pulse. So in 4/4 time, there are 4 beats per measure. The bottom 4 means the quarter note receives 1 beat or pulse. So you've just answered your question. In 4/4 time, how many beats does a quarter note get? That's the bottom number. The answer is 1 beat. Next question is, in 12/8 time, how many quarter notes can you fit in a measure? Now this is getting a little bit trickier here. So I'm going to write out my 12/8. So here's my 12/8 time signature. Now I need to change this to there are 12 beats now per measure, and the eighth note receives 1 beat. That's a lot of eighth notes per measure. So if you want to visualize how those 12 eighth notes would fit in a measure, here is what it would look like. 12 eighth notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's kind of messy looking, so a lot of times you'll see it barred. Instead of having the flags on the eighth notes, they will be barred and grouped. So this is the same exact thing as this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Here's 12 eighth notes. It's just that this looks a little cleaner because they're barred instead of individually flagged, like in this example. So going back to our quiz on time signature practice. In 12/8 time, how many quarter notes can you fit in a measure? Well, I know in 12/8 time I will have 12 eighth notes. What I have to figure out is how many eighth notes equal a quarter note. If I go back to my family tree, I know that I can fit 2 eighth notes equally into 1 quarter note, or 1 quarter note is divided equally into 2 eighth notes. So basically 1 quarter note equals 2 eighth notes. So if I know that 1 quarter note equals 2 eighth notes, I can go back to my 12/8 here, and I can say, all right, instead of 12 eighth notes, I could have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 quarter notes, because my quarter note is equal to 2 eighth notes. In 12/8 time, I have 12 eighth notes. I could also have 6 quarter notes. Again, 1, 2 eighth notes would equal 1 quarter note. Another 2 eighth notes would equal another quarter note. That's 2. Here's 3 quarter notes. 4, 5, 6. So the answer then is 6. Next question, in 9/8 time, how many dotted quarter notes can you fit in a measure? So if we go back here and I switch my equation to be 9, there are 9 beats per measure, and we're in 9/8 time. So I'm going to keep the 8 at the bottom the same. The eighth note receives 1 beat. So in 9/8 time, we have there are 9 beats per measure. When the 8 is on the bottom, the eighth note receives 1 beat. This graphic right here shows 9/8 time really well. Over here, here are my eighth notes. I know in 9/8 time I can have 9 eighth notes per measure. So this second measure demonstrates that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 eighth notes. I know that a quarter note from before, I know that 1 quarter note equals 2 eighth notes. So these 2 eighth notes can equal a quarter note. You get the idea. So now if I wanted to make that a dotted quarter note, I would need to add half of the value. So if these 2 right there are just a quarter note, half of that quarter note is another half. So my dotted quarter note actually equals 3 eighth notes, because you have 1 beat here, that's the quarter, plus half of that is another eighth note. So you have 1 and then that half, so 1.5 beats. So this graphic, going back to the first measure, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. If each of these dotted quarter notes equals 3 eighth notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That means I can have 3 dotted quarter notes. And that's the answer. In 9/8 time, how many dotted quarter notes can you fit in a measure? The answer is 3. In 2/2 time, what kind of note fills 1 whole measure? So going back over to my equation. I'm going to do this, and I think it was 2 time. Yep. So, in 2 time, there are 2 beats per measure. It's always the top number. And when the 2 is on the bottom, our half note gets a beat. So basically, I have 2 half notes per measure. Half note and a half note. Here's what one measure would look like in my music. 2 half notes. 2 beats per measure. Our half note gets a beat. 2 of them per measure. 1, 2. So this asks, in 2 time, what kind of note fills one measure? Well, I know it's not a half note because I need to have 2 half notes in each measure. But I know that there is one kind of note that 2 half notes equals, and that is a whole note. So the answer is whole note. Similarly, in 2/4 time, what kind of note fills one whole measure? So if we go back here, erase that, change this to 2/4, our top number is still the same. There are 2 beats per measure. This time the 4 is on the bottom, so the quarter note receives 1 beat. So then what I would do is draw out my quarter note. Here's a beat. I have 2 beats per measure. My quarter note gets a beat. Therefore, I know I have 2 quarter notes per measure. Here's what one measure could look like in my 2/4 song. The question asks, what kind of note fills one whole measure? I know it's not 2 quarter notes because that's 2 notes, but I do know that a quarter plus a quarter is equal to a half note. So the answer then is half note. These questions are similar to the beginning, and we just fill in our equation. In 6/4 time, what does the top number mean? Remember, always start with there are 6 beats per measure. That's the answer. It doesn't ask what the bottom number means, but if it did, it would be that the quarter note receives 1 beat. In 6/16 time, I think this is one of the last questions. In 6/16 time, what does the bottom number mean? So now again, we're asking about the bottom number. The top number would mean there are 6 beats per measure. The bottom number is 16, so this means now that the 16th note receives 1 beat. Make sure to spell out 16th. And don't write 16th. That won't count. And then you should say how well you understand this concept, and make sure to submit your answers again if you haven't done that yet.